Welcome to KyCPA's podcast, Behind the Numbers. I'm Kimberly Lindsay, your host, and today we are discussing a top concern facing public accounting firms, job burnout. I have with me Dr. Sammie Parsley, a licensed CPA in Kentucky. Dr. Parsley holds a doctorate in accounting from the University of Missouri, where his research focused on behavioral accounting. He currently works as a tax manager at Carr, and Ingram CPAs in their Bowling Green, Kentucky office. Busy season can be especially difficult as accountants find themselves working long hours. Dr. Parsley did a study, and the findings can help public accounting firms develop corporate policies to promote culture that will assist in mitigating the negative effects of job stress during peak season demands. Welcome, Dr. Parsley. I'll let you take it from here.
Well, thank you, Kim. Thanks for having me today, and thanks to the Kentucky Society for participating in this study. Today, we're going to be looking at, part one of a multi-part podcast. We're going to be looking at one of the major issues that are facing a lot of CPA firms today, and that's going to be job burnout and the negative effects of role stress that leads to job burnout. We also know that those individuals experiencing burnout oftentimes will have increased intent to leave as well. So it certainly is a major problem facing a lot of firms today. Many people will argue that it's probably the top problem facing a lot of CPA firms today.
You have some talking points and a PowerPoint that goes along with this. We will have that on our website at kycpa.org. And you can go under the news section under podcasts and you can download it there.
Okay, so the problem of burnout among CPAs, we know that this is a service-oriented industry. That means accommodating client needs is going to be pivotal to long-term success. Long-term success is driven by client demand. Meeting client demands in public accounting often means that accountants work long and strenuous hours. There's a struggle for maintaining that work-life balance. We have a compressed busy season, whether it's tax season, audit season. Those individuals working in public accounting oftentimes find themselves working with unforgiving deadlines. That means maybe working well over 40 hours per week for weeks or sometimes months on end, especially during the first calendar quarter of the year. From an organizational perspective, the busy season acts as somewhat of a selection mechanism. In other words, a rite of passage, which identifies employees who work effectively under some of the most challenging circumstances. From a firm economic perspective, a high percentage of a firm's billable hours is going to be generated during this time, during that compressed busy season. So we're going to talk about the research question here. And this was a study that was conducted going back to 2021 at the University of Missouri-St. Louis. We examined the effect of role stress and job burnout and the mitigating effect of something called leader-member exchange. And why this is important to me, I do work in public accounting. I care deeply about the young people that are entering the profession. And it's good to have them welcomed into, a nurturing and positive environment. I feel that, this study will continue to stimulate discussion for the increased needs of leadership skills in the accounting practice. As a matter of fact, the KyCPA in its core competency framework for entry into the accounting profession emphasizes the importance of leadership skills, including the ability to motivate, to lead teams, and to facilitate the development of a consensus. This study actually focused on millennial accountants. And for purposes of this study, we defined a millennial as an individual that was born between the years 1982 and 2004. We know that these individuals are technologically savvy. They embrace diversity. They have a desire to have open communication. They generally work well in teams. They value work-life balance, value flexibility. They want to make an immediate impact. And you compare that to some of the more, tenured folks in the accounting firms. The older generations, for example, the boomers who are now exiting in many cases, you can define those or look at those individuals as the original workaholics. They feel that younger workers maybe need to await their turn. They value paying their dues, and because of this, there can be some butting of the heads, so to speak. So it's important that we have the bilateral communication, those channels, open communication between older leaders and younger subordinates. The older generations, maybe there wasn't even a notion of work-life balance. In other words, maybe that wasn't even a thing 30 or 40 years ago. So this can create a disconnect between newcomers and your more tenured folks working in the accounting firms.
Does this study show that with the increased technology and working from home, that crossover between work and your home life has become more difficult?
I do believe that as telecommuting has become more prominent in a lot of firms, it is easy to blend, I guess, the boundaries of work and personal time. For example, someone who's telecommuting, maybe they're sitting at home after hours, responding to emails, other back channel communication, and it's quite easy to have the boundaries being blurred between work and personal time. So, with our study, we want to talk about some of the significance, some of the research implications. We know that stress can lead to decreased performance. It can lead to negative job outcomes. There was actually a famous study that was conducted in 1957. It was published in 1958. This wasn't an accounting study. It was actually a medical study, but it involved 40 male tax accountants. They were examined for 6 months in 1957. Complete records were maintained. They were kept of height, weight, exercise, diet, workloads. Results of that study indicated that severe occupational stress was associated with sudden and profound rises in cholesterol levels. Lower levels of cholesterol were observed during times of minimal stress. The study also found that cholesterol levels of these tax accountants actually rose during tax season, and they peaked right around the filing deadline of April 15th, and then declined to a more normal range later on in June. We know that stress can generate health problems for individuals, such as deterioration of mental health, increased group health premiums, increased absenteeism, and subsequent turnover. One thing that we know about turnover, it's very costly. It results in increased training, increased onboarding costs. There's lost productivity, decreased audit quality, and decreased quality of other services that are being provided. Also feel that there are academic implications that can be gleaned from this study. There seems to be, I guess, a mismatch between the desire for leadership skills in the accounting profession and the amount of attention that these skills get within the accounting curriculums at colleges and universities. The development of leadership skills should be a journey that begins by helping students perceive themselves as leaders in the classroom. Resources can be utilized to help students develop a leadership mindset that's going to empower them to embrace future opportunities to develop leadership abilities. This could come in the form of, in the workplace, additional training, CPE, corporate sponsored training programs, or in the accounting curriculums themselves at business schools. It can come in the form of integrating these types of courses within specifically management accounting classes. Next, we want to take a look at the conceptual model that was actually tested. We have our outcome, job burnout, which was getting measured. It is impacted, of course, by role stress, and we're looking at this thing called positive leader-member exchange. And this study is unique in that it's building upon previous studies by examining role stress and job burnout with leader-member exchange. And the focus, again, is going to be on millennial CPAs, those individuals that were born between 1982 and 2004. Just a little background on role stress, we can divide role stress into three different dimensions, if you will: role ambiguity, role conflict, and role overload. Role stressors typically are going to generate negative emotions that can have an adverse effect on employees' psychological states. And these can result from a multitude of factors within a firm. For example, violations of command, lack of autonomy, lack of feedback. Decreased performance may result from accountants who experience extended periods of each one of these dimensions. Role ambiguity, well, that's the lack of clarity employees experience as a result of unclear expectations. Role conflict, we can define that as results from simultaneously contradicting communications and expectations from peers and superiors. Overload, that is the sense of being overwhelmed that individuals feel when there's simply too many responsibilities and demands to meet given time and personal constraints. It should be noted, that an individual experiencing a moderate amount of role stress can be seen as a good thing. It can actually have a positive impact on employee performance by increasing motivation and efforts in order to meet demand. And this phenomenon is known as eustress, and it can be beneficial to both the individual accountant and the firm itself. So what is leader-member exchange? Well, it's a relationship-based theory stating that the relationships between leaders and subordinates is one that develops over time, one that develops as a result of numerous exchanges and transactions. This is something that's been around since actually the 1970s. Recent evidence has shown that there's actually a curvilinear relationship between leader-members exchange and stress. An example of a high-quality LMX relationship between a manager and a subordinate would be indicative of reduced stress for the subordinate up to a correcting point. Now, these types of managers are going to be providing increased communication, increased emotional support, clearly defining roles, things that are going to reduce the uncertainty and assist in keeping stress levels low. Some of the soft skills that we know are trending, such as empathy, communication skills. These skills are trending, not only in the accounting profession, but throughout. Subordinates in high-quality LMX relationships are going to experience several advantages. For example, increased favor and rewards, increased communication from their superiors, decreased uncertainty. So subordinates in low-quality relationships are going to tend to experience the opposite of those things. That's going to lead to increased uncertainty and increased levels of stress. All right, let's talk about job burnout. Just like role stress, we can divide this construct of job burnout into three different dimensions: emotional exhaustion, something called depersonalization, and reduced personal accomplishment. So burnout actually refers to the negative psychological response to the job stressors that we just talked about. Emotional exhaustion is going to typically represent the emotional strain of burnout. In regards to the sequencing of these three dimensions, it typically is the symptom that is experienced first. It's also been identified in prior research as being the number one most critical dimension of burnout. Of the three burnout dimensions, emotional exhaustion scores have been found to be the best predictor of actual turnover. It's often regarded as the most salient proxy for burnout. Depersonalization refers to the negative or the detached response of various job aspects. Detachment and callousness toward clients, toward coworkers and colleagues. This provides an emotional wall between the accountant and job demands. A cynical attitude may often develop. Poor performance is often a symptom of depersonalization. Reduced personal accomplishment refers to a decrease in individual self-efficacy, feelings of incompetence, a lack of workplace achievement. Each stressor, each one of these three stressors that we're looking at, may be manageable individually, but when they occur simultaneously, they may overwhelm that individual. We do know that through prior research, things like poor job satisfaction, poor job performance, increased turnover intent, these are well established job outcomes associated with job burnout.
If someone's listening and or watching and are identifying with what you're saying regarding, like, say I'm experiencing one of these or two of these or all three of them, and in part two we are going to talk to the employers about how to help mitigate some of this. But as an individual, is there things that an individual can also do to mitigate some of these things?
I certainly feel that individuals can implement good habits that are going to help mitigate role stress. One of those, and we'll talk more about this in part two of our podcast, things like physical activity. Being able to share your thoughts and feelings. There's a thing called emotional intelligence, being able to identify how you feel, being able to identify how others feel. These types of things are important to establish communication, to share your how you're feeling in order to be proactive, help offset, help mitigate some of these adverse effects of role stress. So we're going to take a look at the actual hypothetical model here that was tested. There were two hypotheses. Hypothesis one, increased presence of role stress will lead to increased existence of job burnout among millennial CPAs. And we're going to talk next time in part two of our podcast. We will discuss these findings. Hypothesis two, millennial accountants engaged in high quality LMX relationships with their managers will experience lower levels of role stress and burnout. So as you can see in this hypothetical model, the blue line, the solid blue line, illustrates the unmoderated effect. The dashed line is going to be representative of those individuals that were experiencing high quality LMX relationships with their superiors. So in our next podcast, like I said, we're going to conclude as we will be discussing some of these research findings. We'll be talking about firm implications, and we'll also be talking about ways that CPA firms can go about minimizing the adverse effects of role stress and job burnout.
Thank you for joining us in today's podcast, part one, mitigating job burnout. And I am looking forward to some of the solutions in part two with Dr. Parsley. And we also at KyCPA have several articles and on leadership and emotional intelligence in our news section at kycpa.org if you would like to take a look at that. And thank you for joining us today, Dr. Parsley. And if you want to listen to more podcasts at KyCPA Behind the Numbers, you can also find those at kycpa.org under our news section. Thank you, and join us next time.